So, as I briefly mentioned, we will be diving into the engine room, and this is really important because a lot of what is happening with these systems that are put in place to service the public or to monitor, survey, organize work, they in general are all based on the data generation or data extraction from us as workers, as citizens. And the moment we sort of understand how is this data then led to information, then led to what I call the monopolization of truth, then we can begin to see how, just on looking at data, how already there we have to start forming some union responses. And then when this data is then used in these mathematical, very vastly complex mathematical algorithms, then suddenly, the innocence of what you do and don't do as a worker and a citizen becomes something that becomes embedded in a logic of these systems. Now, this might all sound a little bit sort of abstract, but if you think about it, I don't know if any of you use sort of, your cell phone to listen to music on a streaming service, Spotify, for example. Every time that you might click on, one of their recommended playlists or albums, you're actually reconfirming the algorithm. The algorithm that's decided, oh, you like mellow music or you like hard rock or something. So these profiles, these inferences, this is a word that we're going to be looking a lot into, are really, really important and something that we as unions are going to have to sort of learn to grapple in our responses and our demands to management to ensure quality public services on the one hand, but also quality jobs. So we don't get measured against mathematical norms and all of this. So this is what we're going to be doing today. It's going to be quite intense. At any time, as always, if you have a question or comment, raise your hand or just take the microphone and turn on and interrupt, because sometimes it's difficult to see the hands when I'm presenting as well. And good morning, Babu. You'll be listening but may not interact all that much. That's fine.
Yes, ma'am.
Great.
Very good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to dive deep into this, and this is going to be a little bit of a path today. We're going to start opening the floor here to any reflections you have from what you heard last week. A little bit on the homework. What did you see in the newspapers? Did you hear employers or governments speak about technology? How did they do that? Did any of the myths that you heard, did it trigger some thoughts and reflections on your side there? And then we're going to dive into all of this about data and how, again, we can sort of begin to understand this data extraction sort of and the economy, so to speak, behind it, but why we as the union should never, ever, ever speak of data as the new oil, but rather see data in a power perspective. Those who hold the data, who send out the analysis, is what I call the monopolization of truth, is where we have to set in as unions and understand the power grabbing that's going on here, the commodification, so to speak, of work and workers. After that, we'll have a break, of course, in between, and then we'll dive into these things called algorithms, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Now, this might sound like, oh, how am I going to understand all of this? But the way we'll do it, we'll start sort of working very concretely with what could be an algorithm for a typical system that is used in workplaces, automated hiring system. And then we'll begin to find out that it's like, building Lego bricks or something, that everything has a sequence, everything seems to have a logic. And the moment we understand that logic is also when we can begin to form our union responses. And then we'll look ahead at our last workshop next week, where we will really focus on forming the trade union responses to all of this. So that's the agenda of today. I hope you're settled well. and you're feeling comfortable, please don't open the Jamboard yet that Trivata has been kind to put in the chat, and just hold back on that one for a little second, whilst we just spend a moment opening the floor here on last time we went through some of the myths that are typically surrounding us. The myth that there's something inevitable about this technology, that the technology is spoken about almost as if it's a civilization beyond us, as if we have to adapt to the technology and not the other way around. And history has taught us that actually, you can have all the technology in the world, but if there's not the social institutions, if there's not the social backing up of these technologies, then they will not lead to this revolution. And this is where we, as the union movement, have a great opportunity to say we want to mobilize for this revolution in the technology so that it does serve people and planet, and not right now does the absolutely opposite in lack of really thorough demands to these technologies. We also sort of looked at the myth that management understands these systems. So the management who are buying in technologies and putting them in place in public services, not only to face the citizens, but also in relation to sort of governing the employees. And interestingly, last night, quite late, I was on a panel with some scholars who work on this. And one of them, she works with Fortune 500 companies, so the biggest companies in the world. And this was exactly one of her points, that management are not trained in understanding the potential impacts, the risks of these systems. They buy them in because they've been persuaded this is a good tool that will increase their efficiency, and then they don't have a clue about how they should govern this. And this, was both sad to hear that she confirms what we were discussing, but also really should alarm us, right? So I'm going to be quiet there for a minute and just open the floor here to any, have you had any thoughts from last time, any discussions with friends or colleagues that you would like to share? So it would be nice when we do this group work, I'll start sharing so we better can see one another, if you also turn on your mic and of course your camera. But would anybody like to share anything with the group?
This is Alba. Maybe I
Hi,
can.
Alba. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Let me turn on the camera. Okay. I didn't have a chance to discuss the matter because I'm working, in this home office now. But
Yeah.
okay, I could check the website and others. First of all, I might want to share one article. Let's see, how can I do that? Sorry.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, we had it, and then it
Where
disappeared.
is it? Sorry.
There.
Yeah, this is the one.
Yeah,
Okay,
see.
this is the article in last year, November, about the report prepared by the government. And, it's easy to imagine. I think two main points we are concerned about. They are, stressing the digitalization of the society is essential to boost
Yeah.
productivity for the future economic growth in the new normal driven by COVID-19. Okay, that one point I noticed. It's really the point they are trying to sell.
Yeah.
And one concern is, well, among others, is they say it is essential to improve employment condition for women to enable them to continue working while raising children. That's included
No.
in the government report. I was quite surprised. After I read this article, I actually went to the original report. It was written there.
I can see that down the bottom there. The report also said it is essential to improve employment conditions for women to enable them to continue working while raising children.
And in response to this report, I checked the website of JTUC Rengo, that the Japanese National Center. Uh, they expressed some concern about decreased number of employment and some negative impact upon the working conditions, but they haven't really analyzed critically yet. They
Mm,
haven't really proposed any, counter proposal to the government, policies yet. And I check, you know, other websites of public sector unions as well as private sector unions, but in Japan, the trade union have not responded
no.
in, in responded to the government initiative. And most of people actually, I have to say that I get the impression that among the leaders in the national center, this is actually an opportunity, especially for those from public, private sector unions, because they represent worker in the IT industry and the communications, and often those leaders side with management. It's
Mm,
quite common in Japan. So
mm.
uh, I think a public sector union have to do something to give some thoughts for the national center to adopt. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
But before you go, so that paragraph we just read there around improving the employment conditions, I mean, that can be read both positively and negatively, right?
That's
Um,
correct. Yes.
yeah. So how could you see both the positive and negative impact of that paragraph? What should we be aware of?
Well, you know, actually, okay, it might be used to improve a working condition for women who have to take care of children. I'm not suggesting women are the only person
No.
who should take care of the children, but
Yeah.
in fact, I have to admit there's a pressure on them. So, but you know, they can use the tool to help them, but not to help the companies, increase their productivity. So
Yeah.
their focus have to be towards workers instead of companies'
Yeah.
productivity. So
Brilliant. And also, I mean, the situation in Japan, which I have to say is a country I adore and love, but the situation in Japan on the labor market is really not sustainable, is it? With on average 100 hours overtime a month for workers. I mean, this is, and of course the declining birth rate, right? The
mm,
demographic challenges that you're facing. But if you scroll back up to the top, because this really is feeding into what we discussed last time, right? The first sentence there: the digitalization of society is essential to boost productivity for future economic growth. See, there we're being fed with, oh, we have to. It's a digital determinism, right? The only way we can boost productivity, which in this sentence it's a given we should, is through digitalization. Now, very often when I hear this, just as a little wink, wink inspiration, I say to the OECD and others, I say, but aren't we producing ourselves to hell? This overproduction across the world. Is productivity really what we should be aiming for in this time of climate crisis and so on and so forth? Why does productivity remain the constant here? So this is a brilliant example. Thank you for sharing this of these narratives, right? This how we are not taught to say, well, really, is this the best way? Is the best means? And so forth. Thank you. I mean, I hope you can take some of these discussions into Rengo, into your national discussions, which will be essential. Great. Thank you.
yeah, maybe in the future we can invite Rengo people to
Yeah,
our
yeah,
whatever activity. So
yeah.
yeah,
Please consider that. I've done some work with them before, so yeah.
yeah, we will. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to share any thoughts or anything that they saw in the news?
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, hi. Who's there? Oba, would you
Josh
mind
here.
stop sharing,
Yeah,
mate?
I'm trying to. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
There you go.
Sorry.
Great. Hi, Josh.
Hi. So I'm gonna. So I spent a bit of time with our comms team and got them to do a bit of a search
Oh,
using what they've got, the info that they've got, and I'll just try and share the screen as well. So bear with me if it doesn't work, but let's give it a crack. So here we are. So we did a bit of a check-in on what's happening within New Zealand as far as digitisation in the media and the different forms, I suppose, of media providers.
yeah.
And I was a little bit surprised. I would have expected a bit more, but they run a pretty similar narrative around the productivity and opportunities that is created through digitisation. We even got our Australian brothers and sisters in there. So it covers across both workforce efficiency and the productivity, and using COVID as a catalyst at the moment to speed up the process. And again, it's that same narrative. We must have it to to continue, come along on the journey. We're utilising all of the opportunity that we can right now to influence the workforce. So I checked in with our organising team as well to see what the impacts were across the public service. And at the moment, we've got a really significant introduction of technology into the wider public service, health, and community health in particular. And again, they're utilising those device type technologies with all of that personal information, as well as the member information that's going through as well to these third-party providers. So quite disheartening given the conversation that we had last week.
Yeah. It really is. Yeah.
That led to a conversation around bringing everything back in and whether we need to actually start, or where we need to start pushing back with government on holding their own information.
Yeah. And there now I'm looking at Susanna, who is doing a lot of the trade work for you in your region. And this whole thing about bringing it back home, about protecting the data and all of this, if these awful digital trade rules are adopted within the WTO, this will be forbidden, right, to localize the data. Wow. So this is fascinating, Josh. What more do you read out of it?
Well, it wasn't all doom and gloom. So I'll just share a different page, which was good. And so I'll stop sharing here. Bear with me one moment.
No problem. Take your time.
Now, I'm just trying to scroll through here, but it's not working for me. Here we go. There we are. Okay, so this is an article that came through, broader speaking, and it was around acknowledging the privacy issues that come through with the technology change and influence and the digitization. So it explains both continued acceleration. It refers to a survey that was done, the Future of Jobs reports. And for me, just a couple of paragraphs down here is around addressing the questions around the use of the technology, personal and non-personal, and that we need to progress this in a safe way across the globe, not just by country.
Exactly. Yeah. Also, political concerns, corporation misuse data and technology. Yeah, during the COVID. Yeah. So two things I want to reflect on from what you were saying, and the urge, the push to introduce into community health, but also the healthcare sector technologies, right, is something we should really be alarmed about. There's nothing more personal than our health. then our DNA, our blood samples, our DNA becoming a commodity, right? And the implications this can have on your wider life. So let's pin that for now, but remember, let's go back to it and discuss it. Okay, cool, Josh. Is there more there that you yeah?
Oh, look, there's a lot, but I'm quite happy to share all of the information that we gathered.
Yeah, no, but would you like to, in talking with your colleagues, what did they say? What did they pinpoint?
Well, they pinpointed that it was a culmination of events. So I suppose our public service has gone through a bit of a transformation over the last 10 years, where they've been trying to introduce technology. And it started off in the core agencies of inland revenue and social development areas, and then has sort of branched out into the health sector more widely, and now our community sector. So I suppose it was a real wake-up call to have that conversation around the data, and we knew it was happening, and the algorithms that we'll get to, and the trends and the analysis and the ads that pop up on Facebook. So we know it's being used, and now it's about going back and having a conversation with our Public Service Commission, I believe, to see what we can do to influence that retention of data, or at least having the protections in place and an audit to ensure that those protections are in place. Absolutely.
Fantastic. That's so great. I think it would be wonderful. And now again, looking at Susanna and the team, whether we somehow could gather some of these articles, that you can start sharing them with one another, because I think the more you do that, the more we begin to sort of see there's a trend going on, but also note some of the national differences. So this is great. Thank you, Josh. Would anybody else like to say something or share?
I just want to share a little bit. Just I read an article in Nepali Times. So what happened is that the COVID crisis has spurred digitalization in Nepal, that it started, and right now that the COVID-19 crisis has accelerated the digitalization process in the government services, like online meetings to remote educations, and in the health sector there is a telehealth process, and even the governance has been the virtual. They have experiment virtually, like doing the governance around the various part of Nepal. And what is that they are doing that the public sector organization, they are dragging it into a digital transformation. So the digitalization process has been now been introduced in various governance sector, like in the Ministry of Finance and others. So, but the same problem is that the digitalization, how we keep the data secretly, the privacy problem is still a question in Nepal. So this COVID crisis has accelerated the digitalization process, mostly in the government sector services.
Yeah. Wow. So again, it fits perfectly the narrative. COVID-19, which of course it did to suddenly, make us all do what we're doing now. Instead of meeting in person, we're doing this meeting online, right? But it was also very, very handy for big tech. I mean, for the tech companies. If you look at how their profits have skyrocketed over the last year, where many other companies have struggled, of course, how they have gotten richer, then it's, this was like a gift sent from the heavens to big tech, because they could reinforce and reconvince everybody that we need digital solutions. And this, to see this pattern across the world of the digitalization of public services happening so quickly, really wants me to start pushing down on the brake button, right? And saying, well, what contracts are you signing? What are the conditions around, as you so rightly said, Jenny, the data and so on, right? And also, does it really benefit the citizens? Does it really? So Thank you, Jenny. Do you have anything more you'd like to add before I pass the floor to Pratnya?
No,
No.
I have shared a link in the chat box.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Pratnya.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, good morning. I'm not in the best of my health today, but still I'm trying to be there full on 100%. What I would like to share is the thing that is happening right now, that how ma'am told us that like digitalization is taking over in many parts in government public sectors in India as well. And now it has been started that people are enforcing it, uh, that all of the new portals are being opened. For example, as HRMS, like human resource management systems, are being enforced, or there are certain procedures and operations that are being done manually, like on in books, and now all of these have started being done digitally online. So what the current problem that is being faced is, when you get stuck at some point, or when the digital and uh, the official data does not match, we do not have enough talent horizontally or vertically. We are stuck at many issues over there. And
You're on mute, Pratnya.
hello,
Yeah, you're back.
hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Yeah.
Whatever did I say? Was it all missed out?
No, we heard that you don't have the capabilities to horizontally sort of
Yes,
fix these systems.
yes, yes. Yeah. So what we are having is, we don't have a suitable troubleshooting team. We don't have enough talent who can cope up with such kind of instant, like, they want everything that to be instant.
Yeah.
And when we face a hurdle, there are not enough talented people in our sectors, and we just come to a standstill. So without proper planning, what exactly, just for the urge to meet digitalization, they're running haywire. This has to go digital, this has to go digital.
Yeah.
But when such kind of things do happen, we are all stuck. And we, when do get stuck, we are given chart sheets and memos why this thing did not tally, or why there is a difference. So we are like helpless. We don't know who to go to. And this is something we are feeling completely confused. Like, this is how it should not have been done. Yes, there are some pros of digitalization, but they are telling us that now many people are sick, and many people are being COVID positive. So there are 50% chances that you'll be staying at home. So the only advantage that you'll be having is that you can work from home. But when we face such kind of issues, nobody is there to help us out, and that is very sad.
Yeah.
That's it. That's my share.
Yeah, Pranya, thank you for sharing that, and I wish you
Yeah.
also good health. But I think what you're
Yeah. Thank you.
pointing at here is two very, very important issues that we should all note. Number one is what you were saying, as public services become digitalized, jobs, of course,
Yeah.
will be lost, right? And are the
Yes.
public services, are they doing enough to reskill, upskill
Yes.
those who get
Yes.
disrupted, right? That's one thing. But the second thing you point at is this competencies, or the capabilities to fix problems, horizontally or
Yeah.
vertically in these systems. And you point out the lack of enough people with the right talent. I would push back on that and
Yes.
say, well, the public services have not ensured there's enough people who have that talent. But there's a second part of that. And that is, many of these systems are built so that it is the vendor or the designers, the developers of these systems, who are the only ones who can really fix it. It is built in a way to compartmentalize, from if you work in a public service call center, for example, then, and something goes wrong or the system shows a default, you don't even know who to contact to fix this. And it's actually
Yes.
designed that way. It's a power thing, right? And so it's very, very essential issues that you are pointing at here. Really. There's somebody in the waiting room. Somebody let me wait.
Yeah. Fine.
Thank you, Prajna, and good health to you. Please get better.
Good morning.
Good morning, Muzibo.
This is Mujibur Rahman from Bangladesh. And greetings for the International Public Services Day.
Yeah.
Due to increasing COVID patient in my city, I could not even face-to-face meet with my colleagues, but I asked them by telephone. The the members and our trade union colleagues, they little bit know about the digitalization. In our department, the electricity, the smart meter already established in some towns and cities. The meter reader, then they are not going to the consumer's house to taking meter reading, and the bill distributor, they are not going to the consumer's house for reaching the electricity bill to the consumer's house. And the consumers are paying the bill by mobile banking system, or the other. Just the members are thinking about this. They heard about the digitalization this way. Some in health sector, there is they started the telemedicine system due to COVID-19. So little bit they heard about the digitalization. And I asked one management officials that about the AI system and other things. They said that yes, AI system is good for the productivity and the efficiency, and they established the CC camera in the workplace for surveillance and monitoring the employees. They are also satisfied with these things. Yes, they can see the movement of the employees and the workers. So the media man, I asked some media man by telephone that what you thinking about the digitalization and its impact. They are also he's also mentioned that it is good, but it has some bad impact in the society.
Okay.
So that's all. Thank you, sister.
Yeah, thank you, brother. But don't you find it astonishing, all of you, that it is the same narratives? No matter where in the world we are, in Latin America, North America, Europe, Nepal, New Zealand, Australia, India, it's the same. This for me raises all alarm bells, right? The productivity, the efficiency. I want to pick up on what you said, Musabor, for example, about the smart meters.
Right.
So Shoshana Zuboff, who's an American scholar from Harvard, and she's written a book that's thick as a brick, right? But she calls it In the Age of Surveillance Capitalism. She has said something which I think is so smart and for us to remember. Everything called smart, a smartphone, a smart meter, a smart speaker, a smart fridge, we should rename to a surveillance phone, a surveillance meter, a surveillance fridge, and so on, surveillance. Because what these smart meters are doing, they're sold to us as being good for the environment, not to have more energy or water than we need, and all of these things. But they, of course, know the moment we have them in our homes, what's your typical family behavior? When do you get up in the morning and start turning on the lights and needing electricity or water? Where, is the family gathered around certain times of the day for the cooking? Or when do you shower? How often? How much water? All of this data, which, you might say, okay, well, that they know I get up at 6 o'clock doesn't really mean anything. But when it gets put together, they are drawing this picture of your behavior, right? which really boils down to us demanding what's happening with that data. Who has access to it? Is it being commoditized, right? And sold, to, and linked then to health information or whatever. So, there's two things that I really take from what you said, or three things actually, is the narrative is the same. The introduction under productivity and efficiency without questioning it. But we have to ask, and whenever you hear a person say, but we're doing this to increase the productivity, I would then respond, productivity for what? For whom? That they're increasing the monitoring and surveillance of the workers. What are the long-term effects of this lack of trust? Do they need to know how long you're spending on your break or on the toilet? Do they really need to know this? And how is this changing the nature of the workplace? And then, of course, thirdly, that the rapid introduction of these technologies in Nepal is happening again under the COVID excuse, right? So great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yongbei, you've written something in the chat. Do you want to share with us what you wrote?
Well, what I wrote is quite similar to what Aoba said about Japanese society, and mostly the employers and the government are talking about the necessity of digitalization as a new engine of growth for the Korean economy. And usually the workers are described as some people who should adapt themselves to the changing context of digitalization, and they are not expected to take a critical perspective on digitalization, and mostly the workers are excluded from the discussion about the possibility of changing the course of digitalization, and also the discussing the full implications of digitalization, which might impact the not only workplaces but also the democracy and society as a whole. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Which, unfortunately, the exclusion of the workers is, again, a commonality across the whole world. I actually, along those lines, have just had a big argument with the OECD because they had arranged an event with the European Union, the European Commission, on the state of affairs of AI, right? And they had invited the private sector to speak, governments to speak, academia, no workers. And I on Twitter actually really named and shamed them for this. And this, again, this thing that we cannot change it, we cannot shape it, where the majority of these politicians, the majority of the civil servants who are driving these changes also tend to forget, well, they are workers. They're wage earners. They are workers. And this, for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, is unfathomable. I don't understand why workers are so uninvited to the table, given that the majority of people working on this are also workers. It's incredible. But again, a reproduction of the narrative in Korea as well. Okay. Just looking at you all to see if, Jenny, you shared a link there. Would you like to, what was that on the link? Jenny, are you there? No, she's just jumped away, but okay, there's another link there. Oh, yeah, there you are.
I muted myself.
Yeah.
So this is a UNDP report. That's how the digital transformation lead by the COVID-19 in Nepal. So this is the how the sectors has adopted technology and the service delivery, and how to shift education from manual to digitalization. This is the report which the UNDP has released during COVID times.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Great thing for sharing. On the education front, I've also done some work with your brothers and sisters in Education International around the introduction of education technology, also known as EdTech. And here, you know, we really, within PSI as well, should really pay attention to this, because systems that are being put in place now, the focus there is increasing sort of individualized learning, but it is creating massive amounts of data on the children or the learners, but also the teachers. And the majority of that data across the world in everything we looked at is held by private companies, who are then, you know, profiling the children. Or, you know, Harry is a slow learner, is cognitively, you know, challenged or whatever. And you can just imagine how those profiles are going to stick with Harry for the rest of his life, right? This is such an infringement on privacy rights of us as citizens. And there's not enough focus on this. So interesting to see this mentioned here as well. I'll definitely have a look at that report. Okay, listen, thank you all for sharing all of those things. I think we should deep dive now into the discussion. You know, we've been at it for 50 minutes, so I just spend maybe 20 minutes and then we'll have a break and can refresh a little bit and top up on the water and the coffee and the tea or whatever we need. So, you know, summing up, we are experiencing the same narratives across the world. The digital transformation is a given. The rest of us have to adapt. And but we're not really invited to have any influence over the changes around us. So to look at all of this about data, I think it's really important when you discuss with your colleagues as a region that we really understand the extent of this data extraction that is going on. But again, I want to start by bringing Shoshana Zuboff back into this. And look at what she recently said here. Once we search Google, but now Google searches us. Once we thought of digital services as free, but now surveillance capitalists think of us as free. Once I was mine, now I am theirs. Now, this almost sounds Shakespearean. You know, this is like a drama. But in, you know, 99.9% of me agrees with her. We are, and our actions, what we do and what we don't do, is becoming a tradable good. The data that is sucked out of us as we live and breathe is really becoming something that some companies can profit from. And this is something that we as unions should really start focusing on in relation to our members. How do we somehow put some processes, some good practices in place to make sure that you know, this data, which can be very personal, doesn't get into the wrong hands? Or how do we protect the integrity of our members? What we really have to know, now, if you think of yourself as a private person and as a worker, that really no matter what you do, data is being extracted from you. It's only not being extracted from you if you are off the grid, if you don't have your smartphone in your pocket, if you don't have a smart meter in your home, if you don't have any of these digital tools, then you're not being surveyed. But the moment, for example, you use your credit card, the bank, of course, knows what you spend your money on. Do you prefer organic food over non-organic food? Do you have a tendency to buy electronic goods? When do you shop during the day? Do you shop online? If you do, what store? See, all of this information, just using your credit card, how much they then are able to create these profiles on you. And then your smartphone. Now, remembering what Shuzana Supov said, we should call it a surveillance phone. I don't know if you know, but there are 14 sensors in a mobile phone. 14. The phone, of course, knows where you are. It has a GPS tracking system in it if you use the map function to help you get from A to B. It also can hear you speak to your phone. It can see you take photos or have video calls with your phone. But it also has a barometer in it. So it knows whether you are on the first floor of a building or the 27th floor of a building. It also has an accelerometer. It knows at what speed you're traveling from A to B, i.e. it can deduce whether you are walking on a bicycle, in a car, or in a train or a plane. It knows the temperature around you. It also knows the decibel level. So are you in a noisy environment or in a quiet environment? There are 14 sensors. So your phone, no matter if right now mine is on Do Not Disturb lying here next to me, but data is being extracted from it the moment it is on. And many of the apps that we use, have access to those data, those sensors. They might not have any reason to, but Twitter, if you look at some of the sort of small print in the Twitter agreement, they reserve the right to access your microphone now and again, because you can speak to your Twitter and speak in your message. Why should they have that? A lot of the apps that we're putting on our phones that we never read the terms and conditions of are accessing these 14 sensors. So that is the biggest surveillance apparatus ever. And I think if you are anything like me, you hardly go anywhere without your smartphone. So as well, at the same time as it's extremely handy, as we can do emails, we can do SMSs, we can work from our smartphone, it is also generating huge amounts of data on us. I mentioned Spotify, Netflix, all digital systems. Now, just remember that all digital systems per default are generating data and generating these profiles of us, these inferences, a really important word there. Some technologists, the activists in the technology world, say to me, never, ever, ever press one of the recommendations you see on YouTube. Or people who like this video, they also clicked on this. Or if you shop online, you've probably seen, customers who bought this also like this. And they say, never do that. Never click on those links, because it's reconfirming their profiling of you, or it's doing the opposite and then they change the profile. Don't reconfirm the algorithm, so to speak. And then there's just innocent things like customer call centers. If you need to phone your bank or you need to phone a company and you hear this automated response, this conversation will be recorded for educational purposes. That's one. Or another version is this telephone call will be recorded for our records or something. But what it's actually doing is they're recording, of course, what you ask for, so they can train their chatbot. As you see, more and more companies are having chatbots in place, including the unions in Australia actually have got a very elaborate chatbot going. But the recording of us is not just recording what we're asking about and the help we're getting, it's recording our tone of voice, what time of the day we're calling, are we agitated, how does the response we get from the person we're calling, does that calm us down, does it not? So it's also logging this emotional communication stuff. And then I really want to sort of go back to the likes of Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever you might use on your phone. Now, remembering that the phone knows where you are, so it can help you get from A to B, it also knows where you're not. It knows where you never go. For example, do you ever go to the gym? It knows whether you ever go to the swimming pool. So everything you do, and this is so important, everything we do is interesting for them, and everything we don't do is very interesting for them. Because if any of you have a Fitbit, for example, then Fitbit knows your heart rate. It knows your heart rate today compared to a year ago. It knows, therefore, whether your health is worse now than it was a year ago. Combined with, do you ever go to the gym? And you can see there's suddenly a profile here going of you as an unhealthy person, right? If then that's combined with the information from your credit card, but you're also buying a lot of fatty food and chocolate, you know, then this profile of you is totally formed. So we have to understand it's what we do and what we don't do, which is equally as important to them. So really keep that in the back of your mind when we're talking about this. Now, what we don't do is also, for example, if you don't sleep well. Now, I can't see you, but I bet if you could put your hands up and I could see you now, many of you probably have had, you know, bad night's sleep where you wake up and you actually start looking at work emails, and you might even reply to one. Now, all of that is interesting too. They know that you are now have turned on your phone at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're answering work emails. So that you're not sleeping well is just as important for them as anything else that you're doing. So have that in the back of your minds when we start talking about these systems and how we should govern them. Now, I don't know in your region as if this is just as common as in Europe and North America, but I very often hear, it doesn't matter. I've done nothing wrong. You know, they can take my data. I'm fine. You know, I've done nothing illegal. I've done nothing wrong. And I don't know if you hear that or if you even have felt that yourself. What we have to understand here that this is not just about you as an individual. If you say, well, I've done nothing wrong, this is not just about you. You see, everything that you do and don't do is confirming or adjusting the algorithm, the profiles about you, which can affect then, let's say they're profiling women in your region who have this and this type of education, this and this type of job. If you're reconfirming that you are less productive today than you were 10 years ago, or you're actually more trustworthy because you have a more mature voice or whatever, everything there, those bundles of influences, those bundles of profiles are affecting the next generation who are going to be looking for a job, or can be used in an algorithm that is deployed in the United States or in Brazil or in Argentina. You know, we are all interconnected. What you do and don't do and how they interpret that can potentially affect me. This is the chaos theory outlived, you know, where the butterfly flaps its wings in one part of the world, leads to a hurricane in another part of the world. This is where we actually, the embodiment of union collectivism, this is why we as unions should be interested in this. Because what you do and don't do potentially can affect me, even though we're thousands of miles apart. So again, just understanding how deep and how intrusive these systems are and how it is being used to drive profit, really. Then you can say, well, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm thinking, why would anybody want Amazon Alexa, for example, or Google Home inside their homes? Why have we invited big tech into the very core of our inner selves, the privacy of our home? If you have a smart speaker, of course, it's listening. When I lived in Switzerland before and I bought a television, it had a big fat sticker on it when I bought it. And do you know what that sticker said? It said, please do not hold a private conversation in front of this television. But a television is in my lounge, in my home. What am I not doing but having a private conversation? Now, the reason why that sticker was on there was that this was a television you could speak to, turn the volume up, turn the volume down, change channels, unless you deactivated it, right? So we're falling for these, why should I think it's funny to sit in my sofa saying, television, turn up, volume down, instead of pressing the remote button, right? We are falling for what a brilliant author, Tim Wu, he has termed the tyranny of convenience. That these tools are sold to us to make our lives easier. And in many ways they do. We couldn't have continued working in this COVID time had we not the computer and the internet and so on. It is really smart that I can have FaceTime calls on my smartphone with you. It is fantastically smart that we're having this Zoom meeting now rather than this not being able to take place. But it's coming at a cost, and the cost is a long way down the line, our privacy. And Tim Wu, in this great article, and when you get the slides, there's a link to the article there. I really recommend you read it. It was written in the New York Times. But he quotes, for example, the founder of Twitter, who literally said, convenience decides everything. So we're being manipulated by these technologies that are being developed. They're feeding into our laziness, our lust for convenience. It's much easier to speak to your speaker and order a pizza than it is to lift up the phone or even go down to the pizza place. So remember that. How are we being, this narrative of convenience, how is that actually feeding into an even deeper look and grab into our privacy, into our very being? So, let's not underestimate the extent of this data extraction from us, because, this is so severely important for everything to do with digital tools. Now, let me just quickly look at the law in your region. And Susanna has been really helpful in putting this information together, and you have it in the training materials. Across the world, this has become consensus. Data is typically divided into two main categories: non-personal data and then personal data. And personal data can then be even more divided into very sensitive data or personally identifiable information. Now, any sort of tech activist will tell you this is a very false distinction. What is typically termed as non-personal data, so weather reports, can be used to personalize data sets. So, for example, if there's a thunderstorm in a local area outside of Tokyo, and then they're trying to find how many red cars were there, and then they find out, well, out of the red cars, how many were occupied by just one driver. You can quickly see that suddenly they have an idea of where you were in this area. So personal data and non-personal data, this is the typical divide, which many say is more political than actually practical. But our data protection regulations cover the cover the personal data, not the non-personal data. Then the sensitive data, and here it's again quite important that we get to understand that has everything to do with our ethnic origin, political beliefs, religious, but also trade union membership. Now, this is not included in every single data protection law in your region, but some of you do have trade union membership as a sensitive, under the category of sensitive personal data. And of course, that's in there actually to block union busting, right? Being able to sort of pinpoint you, but it doesn't really block it, but it's interesting that it's there. Genetic and biometric data as well. And these sensitive data, they have to be treated with greater care by those who actually get hold of it. So this is sort of the big picture, and this is counting across the world. Now, as workers, Now, if you remember everything you do and don't do is influencing you and everybody else, of course, this means that as automated tools are entering into our workplaces, then it could also have a huge impact on whether you get a job. Do you get promoted? What tasks do you get? When during the day are you asked to work, or do you get fired? And so we must ask, are workers typically protected or included in data protection laws in your region? Now, commonly, yes, but there are exceptions. Singapore, for example, excludes employees in the course of their employment. Australia too, and this really baffles me. I mean, I'd love to talk to you about this, that there is a conditional exemption of workers. So is there, by the way, in the United States, in the Californian data protection regulations. The unions did not push back on a 3-year exclusion of workers' data rights, which also is unfathomable to me. And then in Thailand, employers can collect and use employees' data based on the legitimate interest. Now, the legitimate interest in this case is, well, I have employed you and I have an interest in your safety or knowing what you're doing or making sure you're not stealing from the workplace. So literally this says, well, the employees don't have any right of redress here because it's the legitimate interest of the employers to gather the employees' data. What is particularly alarming, though, in your region, and it's not just in your region, it's also in Africa and Latin America, is that written into the law is consent, that it is a legitimate basis for processing employee data is if the employee gives that consent to management. Okay, yes, I got this job and I now give you the right to extract the data from my actions as part of my job. Now, the European Union, which does lots of mistakes, but one of the good things they said there was that consent cannot be a legal basis for the processing of employees' data because of the power relation between employers and worker. A worker will never be free to give or not give their consent. You can imagine in a work scenario, if you say, no, you cannot process data, personal data on me, you'll probably get fired, right? So actually Europe has gone forward there and said consent cannot be a legal basis for processing workers' data. And I just want you to note that because in all of the data protection laws that we've looked at in your region, consent is the legal basis for this. But also there's a lot of work to be done in your region. And the UNCTAD database here, which covers the whole world, but therefore also your region, 57% only of all the countries in your region have a data protection regulation. 27 don't have any, and then there's 4 countries that they don't have any data on. So there's really work to be done. There is a lot of work that could be done in bridging these gaps, making sure that your brothers and sisters who are do not have any protection whatsoever get some. And I did sort of a recalculation of the UNCTAD figures. So if you think of your region, it means 1.2 billion citizens right now have no data protection. It's a free-for-all grab by big tech companies. But those 1.2 billion, if I looked at the workforce numbers in your region, that's 530 million workers have no data protection rights. This is astonishing to me. And this really is something that, unitedly we should be working on with privacy experts and so on and start pushing for this to happen. Because don't forget what's happening, what data is being profiled and extracted on them will affect you. If they have no protection rights, any data can be taken from them and then fed into these profiling systems. So what rights, for those who do have rights in your region, what rights do you have? And here it's I must say, sort of Indonesia stands out as one where the workers have the majority of rights, but otherwise, it's a bit of a scattered picture. You can have a look at this later, or you have it in your training material. What is good is across these countries mentioned here that workers have the right of access to their data. Now, what does this mean, the right of access? It's called various things in data protection law, but it's generally called a data subject access request. The data subject is the worker, and the access request would mean access to all of the data a company holds on that person. That means every single email, every single influence profile drawn on that person's actions and non-actions. It's every single productivity analysis the company has done. Now, this is potentially a very strong tool for the unions to start thinking, how can we use these access requests as a way to get the data to check the employer for whether they're treating people fairly or not, right? But it also potentially, we're calling to battle if we do this. Anonymity. Now look at that, the top one. This really made me sort of like, ooh. So you do not have the right to be anonymous, which means that the data profiles, the data that is maybe sold or given to other companies, includes your personal data. And this is something I really think we should dig into. If you do not have the right to be anonymous in these data sets, this is the same as saying that your name, your characteristics, your scoring, your productivity, your habits are out there for others to get access to. So the link here to the report, I really recommend reading, and that we dig into this as we go along in this project over the next 3 years, is really start looking at how do some of these gaps affect us negatively? Where can we work together to start pushing for bridging some of these gaps? Remembering that what you do and what I do, we're affecting one another. I just want to put a word here on anonymity, because you're going to hear this a lot. You're going to hear governments say, oh, but all data sets are anonymous. Or you hear tech companies say, well, the anonymized data set said blah, blah, blah. Now, this really is not something we ever should accept. I sat with a group of hackers in Latin America and saw I think they were about 8 or 9 hackers, and they took an over 30,000 strong data sets of 30,000 people. It took them 27 minutes to de-anonymize the whole set. And the link here in blue is to articles that really says that anonymous data sets are really not anonymous. It is relatively easy to de-anonymize data. Now, think of the stories you shared in the beginning around the health data or the community health data. And you can just imagine, what will be the consequence if these health data, which are so personal, whether that can be de-anonymized and it can be pinpointed that that person's health is declining, improving, is above or below average, and so forth. So really, every time you hear, don't worry, the data is anonymous, I would really push back and say, really? How? Are you sure this cannot be de-anonymized? And then hold whoever has said this accountable to, well, really, can you prove to me that this is an anonymous data set that is beyond de-anonymization? This is important because this has to do with the deepest integrity of us as citizens and workers. So I'm going to end here before we just jump into the next bit and give you a little break. We've been listening quite well. So we now have 1:45. So if we can say 5, so in 10 minutes, if you're back in 10 minutes, and we'll pick up and then start understanding how all of this data then gets fed into these algorithms. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, note them down and we'll pick them up after the break. So see you in 10 minutes. Thank you. Everybody. I hope you're back. Is it possible for you to turn on your cameras? And, you know, because we want to take a screenshot to make sure that you're all there. Not to make sure that you're all there, but just so we have that to sort of cement the day, so to speak. There you are. Great. I'm sure Ben or somebody can take a quick picture of us. I hope you've used the break to sort of move around a bit and oxygenize the body. It's we're sitting down a lot. Okay, well, we'll take the screenshot now, and then you can go off camera again. So, wave, everybody. There we go. Great stuff. Great. So before I move on, I just want to hear if you have any reflections or thoughts on what I've just been talking about around this data. So the floor is open. Susanna.
I will have to turn off the fan.
Yeah. How hot is it where you are, Susanna?
I haven't checked today. It's been closer to the 40s, but it's also humid. But the 40s is not so much of an issue.
I would melt. I would die.
No, I was finding very interesting, you know, this element of surveillance through phone or anything smart, and how there is this kind of coming together of the element of advantage and cost. So we want to know where to go on the Google map. Therefore, we put on our GPS, but then there is the cost of how that can then follow us. And I think when you were talking, I was thinking about how that surveillance can be directed at different aspects of us, because we are, for certain people, consumers, potential consumers. And for other people or for ourselves, we can also see ourselves as workers. And then it's about, you know, who we are as workers. Because we're in public services, I think for us, we are also part of a public interest system, public interest institutions, and that's also a certain identity we have. And sometimes the surveillance can be directed at these different aspects of us, either because it wants to sell something from us, it wants to control the way we work, it might want to challenge our union, it might also want to use the way we work in public services to shape public services in a different way. And, you know, considering how much this is often linked with privatization, maybe commodify our public services, make it less public interest based, more commercial interest based. And I think for us also, as we reflect, thinking about what is the intention behind surveillance, what is the part of us and of the collective, therefore, that we are part of, that it relates to, will also help us look at how do we balance the cost and the advantages. There are moments where we might want to say, it's still okay to be surveilled. There are moments where we might want to say, I absolutely don't want to be surveilled as this person at that part of me. And also sometimes we might feel that, you know, the cost is okay. I'm just going to be sent an advertising. And sometimes we might say, no, the cost is just too high. Yeah. There is no way, you know, it's worth having a certain advantage if the cost is that my union can be busted. So thinking that those elements might come also in trying to open up digitalization and that surveillance, and making it so helping us understand also how that surveillance works.
Yeah, brilliant reflections. But also linked to another thing, Susanna, and that is, what can we do to protect our integrity, right? And those of our brothers and sisters, well knowing that whatever you do and don't do is potentially affecting others. And I think, especially inside the union world, in relation to the work that we do, we should not use a tool like WhatsApp. You know, WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, and Facebook has now filed for the right to share data between WhatsApp and Facebook, for example. It's a super surveillance tool where the cost is very high, right? So there's other tools which are far more privacy preserving, which function in exactly the same way as WhatsApp. One of them is called Signal, another one is called Telegram. But this would be a smart move, that we don't expose ourselves willingly by using a tool like WhatsApp. Another thing, and I can't remember, Susanne, if you're on that call, but I ran a series of workshops for Friedrich Ebert Stiftung on union tech, so tech that unions could beneficially use. And in one of those, we had a tech activist. He was guesting us, and he gave several, but two recommendations he gave was that we become very aware of our digital identities, so that when you use Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram, that you actually have various identities on each of these, that you feed them with just a small image of you. Like on Instagram, you portray yourself as somebody who loves music. On Facebook, you portray yourself as somebody rather boring. But that we actually consciously operate with various digital identities to sort of cheat this super surveillance and this sharing of information. He also recommended that we, and this links actually back to some of the comments earlier, that the union movement moves away from storing all of our information on the cloud. So on an Amazon web server, Microsoft Office 365, but then we look into some of the tools offered to us through the decentralized web. Now, this is getting a bit technical, so I won't go down that path, but I'm happy to discuss with you afterwards, any of you, around what is the decentralized web. But then there's a really also very simple way that we can protect our integrity, and that is that we use a VPN, so a virtual private network, on our smartphones and on our computers. I have one that automatically changes my location randomly. You know, one day it might say I'm in Moscow, and the next day I'm somewhere else in the world. And that tool is called Disconnect Me. It blocks, now hold your horses here, over 20,000 cookies a month on my smartphone. It blocks that. Now, 20,000 cookies a month. This is incredible surveillance of where I am, what I'm doing. So really that we should consider putting in a virtual private network in everything that we do. So, but yes, I think your thoughts there, what is the cost of this surveillance? Can we accept this? But also, you know, the fundamental question is, do we know? Do we know what data is being taken and what it is being used for? But thanks for that, Susanna. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions you would like to share? Anybody? Yeah, Jenny?
Queries that when we use our smartphones, we have to agree certain terms and conditions. Like if we did not agree in that terms and conditions, that program won't run. And similarly, when we agree, then there's a message come that we are allowed to access in your contact numbers, mobile photos, and other things. So this is a kind of surveillance.
Yeah, I mean, but this is where informed consent, you know, goes wrong, because you don't really have a choice, right? You either accept that they take your photos, your contact details and all of that, or you don't use the app. There, I would particularly, if you download an app, or you are forced to, because the employer says you have to have this app if you're a home care worker, for example, then I would really advise, if at all possible for monetary reasons, to have two phones. One that is your private phone and one that is your work phone. Because these apps that require access to your photos, to your contacts and all of that, this should really make you worried. I would really ask, do I need that app? If you're forced to have it, I would then say, split your phones between a private and a personal one. Private and a work one, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. Aruba?
Yeah,
Uh,
just a quick comment. Oh, yeah, maybe I can speak later.
No, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah, in Japan, possibly in Korea too, the privacy issues people tend not to challenge because it might sound kind of funny, but the people in East Asia tend to be loyal and don't
Yeah.
question the
Yeah.
authority or big company with created good images. So we don't have experience challenging such issues. So during the course, 3-year, this project, I think it would be great for us to learn good example to challenge such issue in different countries. So it will help us challenge such issues. Thank you.
Yeah, that's such a valid point, and it's in Japan where I've done quite some work there, right? This is something I noticed. You do not challenge the authority, and of course, this is something we have to overcome. How could we maybe reframe this whole thing about having a VPN or using certain tools and not others? Not as a challenge to the authority, but as a support or encouragement of ourselves. And I would love to work with you on that. How do we rename this so that in respect of this culture of not challenging the authority? Because of course, I mean, it's the moment unions put all of their data, all of their documents on the cloud, is also, if you read the small print, the moment we've agreed that Microsoft and Amazon and the rest of them can read our documents. So it's a bit, talking about the convenience issue. There are other possibilities, and we should be tapping into that. Okay, so we'll move on swiftly. You will notice in your training material that there's an annex on the GDPR, the European General Data Protection Regulation. Now, I'm not gonna, for the sake of time, gonna go through this in great detail here, because this will take a long time. But the European GDPR has lots of faults and gaps and mistakes, but it is the strongest data protection regulation in the world. And one I think that a lot of regions could draw inspiration from. For example, around this thing that informed consent is not a legal basis for employers to process employee data, for example. But also it gives us a number of rights around knowing what new technologies are put in place. If you look at point number 4 here, which is Article 35 on a data protection impact assessment, there the employers have to conduct an impact assessment which looks at the impact on individuals, groups, on human rights, on privacy rights, on integrity, and so on, of a digital tool that's being implemented. Now, one thing is law, another thing is practice. And what we're finding out is that the companies are not doing this, and then certainly not doing what they also says in the law. They should be consulting with the workers about these impact assessments. Now, this puts, of course, the workers in a situation which I think is a worldwide phenomenon, that what we don't know, we don't know. If we're not told what digital technologies are in place in our workplaces, well, then we can't react to them, right? So there, I think there's a fundamental issue we should raise around the requirement of transparency. Every employer who puts a digital technology in place, which somehow affects the workers, relies on workers' data, they should be transparent towards the workers around these systems and their purpose, the data, and so forth. And that requirement is partially in the GDPR, but is not in many, many data protection regulations. So I think, if you start working on bridging what would it be, 33% of your region's countries that don't have data protection laws, or if you in a country want to start looking at strategies for advocacy, for talking to your governments about improving workers' data rights. I'm very happy that we hold a specific workshop on this issue. What can we learn from other data protection regulations, and how can we use that to sort of put suggestions in place in your regions? But now I want to open the floor actually and ask you, has your union in any way focused on data regulation? Have you had conversations with your governments? Have you internally in the union been discussing this in relation to your workers' rights? Have you done any lobbying or advocacy conversations with the government or the public services? So I'm just going to stop sharing and open the floor. Also consider that if you haven't done it, but what you've heard today, how could you imagine working on this? So just open the floor here. Yeah, Pradnya.
Yeah, hi again. The topic that you have just shared right now, our union has not reached up to this level yet. We are still meddling with the other grassroots level issues that we are having right now. But I do feel this is something important and that has to be looked into very soon. But I had this question was, now what we have been discussing past 1 hour was, this is something that we are giving consent or we are giving permissions on certain apps, like can you allow or access photos on your phone or deny or give permissions. So I wanted to know that, am I the sole person who's responsible to give access to this data, or there is someone above me, like even if I denied to do it? Because right now around me there are several people who don't even have smartphones. So does this mean that only people who are getting access to these apps or these medias are only is the data of only these people being taken into, or there are other ways also these data are being mapped? That was the first question. And the second one, when I go for a purchase of a smartphone or when I'm handling new applications, is there something that I need to do as a preventive measure so that my data does not get hacked or is being taken away without my permission? That's my question.
Yeah, that
Thank you.
two great questions. So if you don't have a smartphone, you're not directly being surveyed. But
Okay.
the moment that you have a smartphone and you might have pictures on your smartphone of your mother, of your sister, of your friends, and they don't have smartphones, but then suddenly their picture becomes processed, right? Because it's taken from your phone. So although we are, some people are more or less off the grid, less surveyed, they can be surveyed through others, right? So, and on the acceptance of an application and all of that, my best piece of advice there is, as I said, see if you could have 2 phones. If not, then under all circumstances, we should try and install on our phones these tools called a VPN, a virtual private network. That puts a barrier, a layer of protection between you and these systems. But it doesn't 100% close off that these systems can take your photos, can access your contacts, can tap into those sensors on your mobile phone. We just have to remember that these very handy smart things here are super surveillance mechanisms. This is how we should name them. And consider, of course, turning them off now and again. We really don't need our phones on 24 hours a day. All right. Thank you. And going back to your thing about the union not working on this. Now, many unions haven't really focused on data protection yet. but it is something that's coming. And I think the more that you can use each other in this network to inspire one another, what works, what doesn't, what issues are important in New Zealand, in India, in South Korea, blah, 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 then the more we can build that capacity to start engaging in this, right? Because we can't all reinvent the wheel. We have to help one another. And hopefully this network here can be a support for you.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah, thank you. Manjuma.
I'm Manoj.
Yeah, Manoj, sorry.
Good morning. I would like to share one thing. Sometimes government itself forces unions to accept digitalization.
Yeah.
Therefore, in India, about 25, 30 years back, they wanted to introduce computers in the bank to digitize everything in banks. Otherwise, banks were working on manual basis. So what they have said that we want to introduce computers in all the banks, nationalized banks. Almost all the banks were nationalized. The unions refused. The unions have fought against this about 3 to 4 years. But then government did a trick. During the wage revision process, they said we will not process your wage revision unless you agree for the digitalization of your banks. And then they have given some sort of things like that, economic benefit. Said we will give you 2 increments to all the employees for accepting digitalization in the banks. And we will also provide some computer handling incentives to each one. And we will give them training.
Yeah.
At the same time, we will not retrench anyone. So banking unions and federations accepted that proposal. They got 2 increment. That was an economical benefit they have given. But there was no training. So they have brought all the private sectors to train these people. And instead of retrenchment, they have said there will be a voluntary retirement scheme. So thousands of people who are aged, who are above 50, they have accepted voluntary retirement because they cannot operate computer. And those who cannot operate even in the young age, they were trained by the private people. And these private agencies also become permanent in the banking sectors. So government has digitalized everything like this in India.
Yeah.
So this can be one of the aspects when government wants to force unions and federations, they can do it tactfully.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important point, right? That you know, that in the end of the day, it is management's prerogative to govern a company or a workforce, right? What I, of course, would like us to at some point be, have enough knowledge about all of this that we say, okay, digitalize, but these are our conditions, around the data, around this and this, that the unions can table a response to this. And I just want to add, we will be talking about it in the next workshop, but just add a comment here around this automation and the loss of jobs. Right now, there's no cost for an employer to automate and to disrupt work. And this, I think, is something we as the union movement should push for globally, is there has to be obligations connected to disruption. If an employer puts a system in place, which means that a lot of workers will lose their jobs, they should be obliged to retrain, to help these workers onwards, either within the workplace or beyond the workplace. We cannot accept on a geopolitical level or a geo-economic, social economic level across the world that these technologies can be put in place totally disrespecting the workers, their livelihoods, and so forth. And, apart from some collective agreements, some laws in some countries, it is cost-free right now to disrupt. And that, I think, should be one of the key political pushes from the union movement on this. But thank you for sharing.
At that point of time, people were not aware of this data and the privacy and all that.
No.
So they have just accepted for economical reasons. They have accepted all digitalization.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now at least the information and technology laws in India is quite strong. We
Yeah.
are not allowing the applications which has servers outside India, like some games and some Twitters and all that.
Yeah.
So slowly the people have started to understand the importance of data privacy.
Yeah. No, of course, 30, 40 years ago. No, this, I think a lot of employers don't understand it still, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you for sharing.
Christina,
Kate,
sorry,
yeah.
Chris,
Yeah.
yeah, just before you move on, I just wanted to check because earlier you mentioned how the European data, protection privacy laws are the best, but I wanted to work out whether that's, I don't know, so this is not a comment, it's a question, but because our interest is, privacy is important, but I think our interest is also around whether governments are giving away the data that is what, including the right to govern data, not just our what are our individual rights, but the government's right to govern data, the government's right to, to be able to ensure that we can reconceptualize data as a common good and as something that we can draw on for our public services, etc. So from that kind of data sovereignty point of view, does the European law match, for example, the Indian, data sovereignty regulations or the others that have been introduced in the global south in some countries?
It's a big question. So there's several responses to that. So the public services have to abide by the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and its founding principles on data minimalization, that the data cannot be reprocessed for other reasons than the original reason, and all of this. So we can go into details on that. But on the other issue that you're raising, are they outsourcing the governance of this data to private actors? Well, there in many countries, the answer is yes, right? That they are through procurement, through outsourcing, they are allowing private companies to either hold the data, but also to analyze it, which is creating a dependency relation between the public sector and the private companies who are doing this, where it is the private companies who are feeding this monopolization of truth back to the public services, because the public services don't have the skills, the knowledge, the personnel. And then we end up in a virtuous downward spiral. Now, there's a lot of technicalities in the law around this, around data controller, data processor, but generally speaking, in the GDPR, it's not free for all. The public services are bound by very strict data protection regimes, also in the procurement situation.
Yeah, I'm not actually, asking so much of whether the public services are bound, it's whether the corporations are bound, because the whole idea of data governance and regulation that would allow for data sovereignty would be that governments all, have data regulation agencies who determine who can license data under what circumstances, and that they can't actually aggregate our data and use it and commercialize it in ways that is happening now. I mean, this is, anyway, we can discuss it later, but I want to make sure that we're not saying that the best laws are only about protecting individual privacy, because from our point of view, the best laws will be those that properly govern data so that we can all use it as a benefit as well in the future, and not as well as address the individual privacy issues.
Dead important point, because very, very few data protection or data rights laws, I would rather call them, allow for the collective good of that data. They do not give access to us as citizens. We don't have access to the collective insights of the data. And this is also where data anonymization comes into the picture, right? So, but that is a very big discussion. But no, the GDPR does not give certain rights around that. I think it's a step on the way. I think, you know, we can get to there around data sovereignty, around data as a collective good, but our governments are certainly not willing to that across the world, but it could become a union push and should be. But
Yeah.
no,
And we might not be able to do it in these 3 workshops, but I think
No.
in the future
Yeah.
we should be able to, we should discuss
Yeah.
that as our
Yeah.
response. Maybe in the next, you know, we can touch on it in the next
Yeah.
workshop. What is our response?
Yeah.
Because I think there, from my understanding from IT for Change, that there is some steps being made in India to have the government adopt some greater data sovereignty type steps, whereas in the rest of our region, particularly in Japan, Singapore and Australia, the exact opposite is the case.
Yeah, exactly.
It's making sure that there are no data sovereignty rights.
Yeah.
It's trying to instill these. So I think, yeah, maybe next time we can think about it, but yeah, just wanted to
In the
raise that.
meantime, look into the decentralized web. So Google that. And Tim Berners-Lee, or Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who actually invented the World Wide Web, he is now, you know, so upset about what's happening to the World Wide Web. But he's starting something within the decentralized web school of thought to give us much more control over our data, right? But it is, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big topic that we should and must discuss either next time or next time.
Yeah. Great.
Thanks, Kate. Susanna, you had your hand up too.
Yes, I wanted to build on what Manoj mentioned about the struggle in the banking sector against bringing computers, and also maybe building a bit on what Kate was saying about the question of governance. And I think the parallel in terms of the issue at that time in the banking sector being about unions not being involved, being about workers not being trained, you know, being about the fact that there was a certain redundancy that was created by a decision of management and that it was not accountable for it. I think that element is very similar. But I think here we are going also in a question of control of our system and sovereignty. So to continue the parallel, at that time in India also what the government did is that because it was going to bring computers in so many crucial systems, it also started building computers. It created an industry so that there was a certain amount of sovereignty and there wasn't a dependence on other countries to have that infrastructure that was becoming critical.
Yeah.
And it's later through the trade organization that computer building capacity was dismantled, and now India doesn't have that capacity. I think somewhere we also need to look at that question of digitalization also bringing with it issues of infrastructure creation, who control that infrastructure. And in many ways, data is both infrastructure, but because it has these additional qualities of allowing to develop intelligence out of it and an understanding that allows for control, it is more than just a tool. It is more than just the fact that you move from paper to computer and you move from computer to the cloud. And for us in public services, I think that question of that control and how that can potentially impact on the systems that we work with, because those systems are not just to, you know, like provide health, but we want to ensure that there is quality public healthcare. And that's different than, you know, privatized services for money. And there, I think it's very important for us to try to understand how these will come and play within those dynamics also.
Excellent perspective. I mean, really, Susanna, yes, the infrastructure should be seen as a country's sovereignty, really, and should be seen as the human rights protection of both the citizens, but also the companies. Now, what is happening, though, is the total opposite of it, apart from in a few countries. Now, Germany, of all countries, have built something they call the Bundescloud. And Bundes is, you know, is the name of Germany. but all public service data from every citizen, every public service, everything is now stored on that Bundes cloud, which is not a Microsoft cloud, it's not an Amazon cloud. It is held by the German state. It is creating its own protection, its sovereign protection, its sovereign systems, acknowledging the value, the integrity, and so on of public service data. This is amazing, but it's also cost them millions and millions of euros, right? So we need an awareness of this. I absolutely support your push that we have to see this as an infrastructure of sovereignty. But as you know all too well, in trade agreements, if we don't stop those e-commerce or digital trade rules discussions, it would never be possible to create those sovereign infrastructures. We also have the case in many countries in your region and elsewhere in the world where the lack of the public possibility to invest in mobile or internet infrastructure, mobile mast and technologies, has opened the space for the private companies, for big tech, but also Chinese, Alibaba, Tencent, and the rest of them, to put up mobile technologies against one demand very often, and that is that they keep the data. And for me, again, how any multilateral body has allowed this to happen, why the World Bank is not demanded to give enough money so that countries can build their own infrastructure to protect their integrity and sovereignty going forward is mind-blowing to me. We are utilizing the fact that some countries are so poor that they cannot invest in these things, and therefore private companies can walk in with all of their millions and reap countries for a very valuable and protected asset, our privacy. So it's a very valid point. And, ideally on a global level, PSI, the ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation should be pushing this as one of the main points in everything. Because if it doesn't matter what we do in other sectors, it doesn't matter what we do in other union work, if we lose the sovereignty, the privacy in our countries, we've lost everything to big tech, essentially. So thank you for raising that. Very, very important point.
I just wanted to add to the example of Germany and Bundescloud, that in this region we also are dealing with very authoritarian governments. So only the government having control over all of the data might also not be something that we are very comfortable with. So a system where the control is public control defined in a way that it's not only about government, but it's also about workers and communities.
Yeah.
Maybe something that is would be more people would be comfortable with.
Yeah, no, that's a very important point. Yeah, we mustn't overestimate or overglorify governments either. No, for sure. I understand that. I think, though, the problem would be that an authoritarian state would never be interested in joint public control, but it should be a demand, of course, from the union. So it's great that you have in your region this awareness raising, that you have Susanna, who is particularly focused on digital trade as well, that Kate is so into all of this, because this is going to be, a union issue of great importance going forward. Now I want to deep dive into this very notion that data is power. Right? We should not talk about data as the new oil, because if we buy into that narrative, then we are agreeing that it's a commodity that can be bought and sold. Then we also agreeing that our privacy can be bought and sold. Now, power is the issue. We must see data in a power position. Going back to this monopolization of truth, it is those who hold the data who also have the power to manipulate the narrative. Right? So really, really, data is power. This has to be our mantra. So let's dive into algorithms. Now, at the core of every single digital system out there that is extracting data, generating data sets, are algorithms. Algorithms, you know, if we go back to our school days and mathematics, and we learned everything about equations, algebra, logic, probability analysis, and all of these things the majority of people just did not like learning about. This is what an algorithm does. It is a step-by-step procedure for solving a particular problem or accomplishing some task. Identify how many red cars are driving past this intersection at 4 o'clock in the morning, for example. It is told precisely what to do, and it is given access to the information to do it. And it is done on a computer. The computer, the speed, the processing speed of a computer or multiple computers means that these algorithms work at the speed of lightning. But we have to see algorithms in that very sequential focus. You know, mathematical can be very complex, but it is a mathematical order in which a predetermined goal has been established. You need to do this, find the right candidate for a job, find out who is less productive at work, and then it is fed the data so it can calculate from that who is strong, not strong, or who should be fired or not fired. So this is really sort of bringing light and new life to our old mathematical lessons in school. But this is the essence of an algorithm. It knows what it's going to do, and it's given complex mathematical steps along the way to do it. Now, a really helpful way of thinking of an algorithm is thinking of a recipe. If you are going to sort of cook or make soup, for example, and you get out your recipe book, then it tells you exactly what you need to do. It has told you to take 350 grams of onions, cut them up, fry them. Then you add the tomatoes that you have peeled, and these tomatoes should be this and this sort. And then you add the salt and the pepper. So the recipe tells you what to do and the order in which you should do it. Both of these are important. Your soup would not taste as good if you fried the tomatoes and boiled the onions, for example. So it is what you do and the order in which you do it, which determines the outcome, right? The ingredients in our soup here, the tomatoes, the onions, the spices, are the data. So the ingredients it is fed is also determining the outcome. Make a soup. How good that soup is will also depend on how good your ingredients are. Now, data can be rubbish. It can be very poor. It can be a small data set. It can be full of bias and discriminations. It can be non-representative, you know, like a rotten tomato or bad onions. So the quality of the ingredients, the instructions that are given to this algorithm, and the order of those instructions determine the quality of the outcome. In this case, the soup. So really, you know, every time you think of you're trying to explain what an algorithm is, just remember sort of a recipe book, because that gives you everything you need to understand in trying to understand how then bad ingredients gives a bad soup. How if we swap the order in the algorithm, our soup will not taste good, you know, if we fry the tomatoes and boil the onions. So really, you know, this is a helpful way of kind of determining what could be the possible outcome. If our company says they're bringing in an automating scheduling tool to schedule community healthcare workers' routes, you know, who goes where, which client, you know, what's the order of the clients and all of this, then, you know, we can start thinking about, okay, they want an automated scheduling tool to increase the efficiency of the car use between these clients. Well, then we can start breaking that down and say, well, how is this system actually working? What data, what are the ingredients? Well, that's probably previous travel patterns between clients, but then it's also probably information on the clients. How many clients need to be washed? How many clients need to have bandages changed or medication given? How much time does it take per client? You know, we can begin to break down how is this system actually structured. Of course, we should also ask management, but if they don't give us that, we can begin to break down and then also identify where can there be some issues which are, you know, dangerous for our privacy, which are in disrespect for the citizens, but also disrespect for the workers. So this is a helpful analogy to sort of understand this algorithmic sort of decision making. Hello? Oh, sorry, could you kindly mute yourself, whoever went off mute? Thanks. Now I really want us to do some group work, and we'll be going on to Jamboards in 3 different groups, and they will be identified in a second. Remind me now, it's youth group, Southeast Asia, and what was the last one, Susanna?
Number 1 is East Asia and Oceania.
Okay.
Number 2 is the youth group. Sorry, number 2 is the youth group. Number 3 is South Asia. South
Asia. Okay, thank you. And what I want you to do is you're going to write an algorithm now. So you're going to write sort of the instructions, the order of those instructions, and then the data, the ingredients. What are the sources? Where did this data come from for an automated hiring system? Now, I've already given you the goal. The goal is that the algorithm should find the most skilled, dedicated, and fast-paced staff. So this is what they're looking for. Now, what would the algorithm have been told to do? What should it look for? Who should it not include? So in our tomato soup, we don't want any apples. So it's been told, do not include apples. If we want to find somebody who's fast, skilled, and dedicated, what would the instructions to the algorithm look like? And from where is the data, the ingredients, where do they come from to do that? So I hope it's pretty clear what you should do. I'm going to give you, what's the time now? It's 8:45. I'm going to give you 20 minutes to discuss this in your groups. So you go back to your Jamboards. Remember to choose at the top. The facilitators will help you slide 1, slide 2, or slide 3. And then we'll come back in 20 minutes and discuss what you have. How do you find, and how does an algorithm find the skilled, most skilled, dedicated, and fast-paced staff? So in the chat now, you should have the link to the Jamboard. There you go. But also, I think Ben is going to send you into the breakout group rooms. And I will see you back here in 20 minutes. You will get a message when we're about to close. Would the facilitator from group number 1 like to take the mic?
Yeah, okay, sorry. This is Aoba. I'm sorry. What I have realized is that I'm not digitalized enough. So I have to use this. Yeah, it's good or bad, but yeah, okay. Anyway. It's incomplete, but however, I think you can get a sense from our, discussion from our group. Okay, first the goal, it has been predetermined, and we thought about instructions, which could be, paraphrased as a criteria for the recruitment.
Yeah.
So first of all, we have to define the skills required for the positions. And then, because we need dedicated workers, so we have to measure the applicant's expected dedication to work based on the past work experiences, and also including a lens to the service in the past. So we might want to prefer to recruit people who, tend to work a longer period of time at the one job. And also, we need to get the, we realize that we have to track and trace applicants' past behavior and reputation through checking the social medias and Instagram and Facebook and others. And then the third one, order of instructions, basically the same order written in the instructions. I'm sorry, it's incomplete, but we have to define the necessary skills and then measure applicants' expected dedications through some research. And the third, track and trace applicants' behavior and the reputations. And then we have to establish overall scoring mechanism or system.
Yeah.
Therefore, we might have 100 applicants and we can score them all. And then the fourth is we are supposed to get the most skilled and dedicated and fast-paced staff.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant, brilliant work. So if I was to unpack this from a union perspective, right, what you have done here is you've taken the job description. We need somebody skilled, dedicated, and fast-paced. And to do that, you yourself mentioned you would use social media data, Instagram and so on, and other social media. So already here, we're now linking what digital identity does a person have on the social media? Are there lots of pictures with them having a party or something? Does this show that they're dedicated to work or doesn't it? Right. So already here, we begin to see how all of this is interconnected. What we put out there as stories of our lives, how that then could be used to either choose us or reject us to a job, right? On the skills, so you said we need to define the skills required. Now, very often the way skills are defined are formal qualifications. So what education does a person have? But that means we are excluding all of the people who don't maybe have a formal education, but are highly skilled. They can have learned on the job. They can be autodidact. So already here, from what you've written, we can see we're grouping people into boxes, but excluding thereby automatically lots of other people. So thank you so much. I want to hasten on because time is running to group number 2, and then we'll sum up all of this in the end. So here was group number 2, the young workers. Who would like to talk us through your slide?
I think I'm going to talk through.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
So we actually arrived at something quite similar. And we started off, the order of our instructions here were qualifications. And then specifically education level, years of relevant experience, and things like language skills. And then we went on to things like rating/review from former employers or colleagues, which is a way that employers might measure softer interpersonal skills. And an example was used of LinkedIn now having sort of people being able to rate you or vote you up on a particular skill that you might have. So it might say you're good at writing, and 10 people have said, yes, this person is good at writing. Employer's reputation is another one that we added. And another one that Trimita had mentioned she had experience with looking at was dedication. With dedication was level of turnover. And for instance, you might see that somebody has worked at sort of 5 different places over the course of 7 years. And you want to say, well, why have you moved from job to job? Why are you quitting every 12 months? Yeah. A final one, or another one we mentioned, was the match of salary expectations. We said that this came towards the end, but it is very common in a lot of recruitment processes. And we also said the ability to be fast-paced, availability and responsiveness, being tech-savvy, being a multitasker. And we might say, for instance, that being tech savvy is one that's becoming increasingly required by employers. And we raise things like gauging online presence through social media or posts on blogs as a data source that this information might come from. But also other ones that have become increasingly common are things like criminal record checks and credit scores. And both of these can be checked by employers online. They, I mean, often will ask for people's permission to do so, but it's becoming increasingly common that this is regularly done in hiring processes.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And how interesting that it was so similar to group number 1. I want to pick up on one, and this is your item number 6. So fast-paced has also to do with availability, right? Now, this is dead right. This is one way of measuring it, but who does that exclude? That potentially excludes anyone with care responsibilities. You know, are they available? Are they dedicated if they're not available to work long hours, for example, or extra shifts? So there could very well be in this algorithm, well, you can't be available if you have care responsibilities. So we're going to exclude everybody who, through their pictures on Instagram or through their CV or resume, writes they have children, for example. So this is a way that you could unpack this even further, right? You yourself said, well, availability, responsiveness. Well, that means as well that defining that in a box means that a whole big group is excluded. Now, on the LinkedIn and on the rating, again, the same issue as the previous group, right? We seem to have accepted that skills equals formal qualifications. Yet we all know that our skills and competencies grow as we work. You know, the very fact that we're working, and maybe some of you have never used Jamboard before, and suddenly now you're skilled at using sticky notes and sorting them and all of this. Now, that's not written on LinkedIn. We don't necessarily write that as an experience on our resume, but it shows that we are adaptable, that we are open to change, to learn new things. So there's a lot that LinkedIn, you know, LinkedIn is used by many AI systems to map skills gaps and so on. Yet LinkedIn only gives the very, very top level because we're not trained at thinking, how do I portray myself? How do I portray my competencies, my soft skills, as you write here in the group? Brilliant, brilliant work. I'm now going to zoom to group number 3 here. And who would like to talk about your slide?
So group number 3, I will present from my side.
Thank you, Jenny.
Okay, so we have a good discussion during the workout. So what we will check what from the data sources will be from the online interviews. We will collect the CV online, and like our colleagues told, that we will look for the social networking sites like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also we will have any sort of documents from his previous employer, and also the articles he or she has published during his working period, and also the supporting documents like his educational and experience letters. First, we will check his or her CV, and we will shortlist the candidate which is according to our requirement or not. And then next step, we will go for the dedication. Let's say dedication, that how much he is dedicated to his or her work from the CV or previous employment assessment data, which is we will found in online. And also he or she has any criminal reports, any debt from banks, social media for his personal use can be also identify what kind of nature of person is he or she. And for the third step, for fast track, we will identify whether he or she is healthy or not to perform his work. and also the experience certificate submitted for submitted during his application is real or not. We need to identify whether this is so. For this is the group work we have done in our South Asia group.
Amazing. Again, really, really interesting. Also the overlap. So two things I want to pick up here, where one of them resembled very much the youth group, is that you would check, for example, the credit scoring, right? And you would check police records. Now, we all know that credit scoring is extremely biased to the already disadvantaged people. You know, if you are from, you haven't had a steady job or you don't have a good education, then getting a high credit score is extremely difficult, right? Or that you have been, or you know, also the reverse, illogically, that if you've never had debt, then you also get a lower credit score. So credit score is extremely biased. And this is something that we also really have to look into, because a lot of employers do use credit scores as an indication or interpretation of a person. And then your fast-paced one, look at the health data. See, this was genius. This is precisely kind of what some algorithms and systems will do. They will try to find out from, you know, your pictures again on your social media profile. Are you overweight? If you're overweight, does this mean that that you can't really keep the high pace, or that you will have problems with fatigue or whatever? But also, you know, going out there trying to find more concrete health data about a person. This is more difficult because there are certain protections around that. But again, as I said, most anonymized data sets can be de-anonymized. So, you know, if you do have a condition of any kind, this is not impossible to find out. So again, a really, really good exercise. Now, one comment, if I go back to the youth group, and this is quite funny because you're the youth group, but none of you have mentioned TikTok, for example, which is now, you know, the biggest social media thing where we portray ourselves in many ways, some funny, some not so funny. But don't forget, TikTok is also what a window to who you are or who they perceive you are. So I think my main lesson from hearing all of you speak is you've really understood how to break down from a job advertisement, break down how a system potentially works, what combination of data sources and instructions that are given, and how this potentially can impact our union quest for diverse and inclusive labor markets. You know, in this particular slide we're looking at now, everybody who doesn't look healthy, according to this algorithmic norm, will automatically not get an interview, right? Which means, are we heading towards a world where we all have to look slim to get a job? Now, this is putting it on the extreme, but essentially, if you look at this, this could be one of the potential outcomes, right? And the same, you know, indigenous populations, many of them, they say that we should always judge our actions and our strategies today on the impact they will have for the next 7 generations. Now, I bet you many of us have never considered that. But when you put pictures up on any social media of your children or your friends, start really thinking, how could this potentially impact their life and work opportunities in this this system here that is very real, has no emotions, has no morals, and has certainly no norms. So thank you all. I'm just going to stop sharing and open the floor. Does anybody else have any reflections you would like to share on this exercise?
Christina, I don't know, sorry, that might have been someone else, but one thing I think that's clear from this process is that whether it be online or offline, you know, our demands as a union movement would be the same. But those things that we've achieved over time for non-discrimination, for example, for a prohibition on asking certain questions in interviews or making judgments about workers based on their health or their length of service, because that would be, you know, discriminatory for women or etc. That these things should remain. I mean, we still, they are core principles, whether it's online or offline. I guess the question is, why is it that they are then being enabled online? And it does come back partly to this question of these trade rules. If we can't examine an algorithm, then we can't prove that they're discriminatory.
Exactly.
And we can't challenge the basis on which these decisions are being made. I mean, they might be made for applications for promotion, or, you know, to go to a higher grade or so forth. And so I think that's the important thing. We all understand the injustice of making decisions based on people's health or, you know, other status, but what we're being excluded from, because big tech is setting the rules, is, as a trade union movement, is being able to provide the evidence of discriminatory practice by employers.
Exactly. Now, at the moment, so you're dead right, the same laws apply: anti-discrimination laws, collective agreements, working time laws, all of that. But the companies right now are hiding behind that there's no requirement of transparency. There's no regulation of these systems, in the sense that they are obliged to log the instructions to the algorithm. Companies or deploying public services are obliged to be open and answer to authorities or to anybody who has a question about the instructions. They're not obliged to do that. So it's only if that we start, as the unions in the labor market, we start noticing that there seems to be a tendency or a pattern in who they are employing, or that we know that particular people had applied for this job but were never called for an interview. Why? So until, and Lord knows how long that will take, that there will be transparency, auditability requirements to these algorithms and to these systems, until then, the unions are going to have to be the watchdogs. We're going to have to start asking, you know, our employers, our managers, around the instructions, the data, the sources. And this is something, you know, we'll be looking more into in the next workshop. But your question is brilliant, Kate, because at the moment, it's almost like a cowboy land. Anything goes. And if they don't find out, great. If they do, we'll have our legal team ready with a response. So that's one thing. Second thing, which we also have to bear in mind with a lot of these systems, are that they are trained. So an algorithm gets trained in a lab before it's sent out there and sold. It's usually trained on data from another country than yours. The majority of these systems are designed in the United States or in China. And of course, a dedicated, you know, the interpretation of dedication, of skilled, is very different from culture to culture. Yet if, let's say, a system designed in the United States in Colorado gets deployed in South Korea or in India or in Nepal or wherever country you're from here, and doesn't take into consideration your cultural norms, what is a good worker in your culture, according to your institutions, your history, your religious beliefs, and so on, then this gives grounds to what you might have heard the concept of digital colonialism, that it is the norms and values, the rightness of whoever has developed this that get transposed to other countries, regardless and without consideration of their norms and values, history, and so forth. So again, you know, directly answered your question, because there's no requirement of transparency and accountability at the minute, then they can get away with all of these things, because who's going to check whether the system is, in this case, discriminative or harmful? And this is where all of the AI principles out there who say AI systems must be transparent, accountable, and fair, well, those are words if they're not backed up by practice. And the practice would here be either through collective agreement, but law as well, around the requirement of transparency and accountability. So there we go. Listen, we're really, yeah, God.
Sorry, Christina, and just to, because in a number of the countries involved, those in Southeast, those Singapore, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, where there's trade rules that they explicitly prohibit the right to have access to the algorithm. So it's not just that it's not transparent, but these rules say we cannot have access. And the government, I mean, it's one thing for us as trade unions even to exclude us from having access to those algorithms, but the government cannot have access. So your Human Rights Commission, you know, who you take your case to say this is discrimination, cannot have access to the algorithm to prove that that algorithm has discriminated against those workers. And that's the extraordinary part of what one extraordinary part of what these trade rules do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for pointing that out, which is, you know, again, if this gets into the WTO, into the digital trade rules or e-commerce rules, I mean, this is absolutely shocking that any government has brought into this, right? I mean, that they themselves are writing off their duty to govern because they can't govern, as you so rightly say, Kate, on something they don't have access to. And then we mustn't forget that, you know, estimates are that 95% of all digital systems that are used in the public services, but also in private services, are not homemade, are not made by the public service in question or a company in question. They're all bought in by a third party, or from a third party. So this means that not only do we not have our own systems so we can learn and retrain the algorithm and adjust it if it has any negative impacts, which it will have, but the vast 95%, can you imagine, can now start hiding behind trade secrets, intellectual property, and I don't need to reveal my source code. This is one of the largest attacks on workers' rights in our case, but indeed citizen rights in the world. Now, we actually have passed our time here, but I'm wondering, will you agree to go 10 minutes more so we can wrap up? Is any objections? Say them now, and if not, I'll continue. Is that okay for 10 minutes more? Great. So let's dart back to the presentation here. We're soon sort of nearing an end, but I really would advise you in the week before we meet again is to really start thinking about, you know, every time you see a job advertisement, start thinking how, if they use an automated hiring system, for example, what potential harms could there be to certain people judging by the words in this job description. I'm just seeing the chat there again. Sorry, I can't get it up for some reason. Would whoever wrote something in the chat kindly take the mic?
I just wanted to give the names of the countries in this group that have already signed up to the CPTPP and therefore already given up their right to access algorithms. So that's Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and Singapore.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely devastating. And I have to say, from a worker's point of view here, I really want to thank your region for putting trade so seriously up on the agenda, because it is not in many global unions, and that you are doing it is just amazing. But we need to strengthen our joint efforts across the world on this. Now, I'm not going to go into details with these 4 boxes because you have them in the training material. But what we did now is a very simplified algorithm. You've actually written in this group exercise an algorithm. But real life systems consist of many, many algorithms all at once. Some of them are classifying algorithms, others are filtering. But, you know, really have a look at the training material, read through this, because what these classifications give us is an indication, again, of when you see, in this case, a job advertisement, How can we start breaking down where could there be some issues we need to raise with management? For example, Kate's question. You know, a simple question to management would be, okay, you have informed us you're using an automated hiring tool. How do you ensure compliance with anti-discrimination law, for example? Right, and really get them to sort of answer that, because you have now found out that there can be very, very harsh impacts and actually breaches of those laws. So have a look at these, and also note how many of them you'll recognize from your social media flow, from what you see on the internet and so on. You can already begin to see how you as an individual are subject to these different algorithms. So just ending here with a brief note on artificial intelligence and machine learning. There is a very bad habit in the world to call everything digital artificial intelligence. And this is very, very wrong. As Kate Crawford, who is a brilliant AI researcher, she's just written a book called The AI Atlas. She recently said in an interview, she said around artificial intelligence, she said there is nothing artificial and there's nothing intelligent about artificial intelligence. And what she meant by that is that artificial intelligence is, you know, the whole system is created by people. So therefore it's not artificial. And the intelligence part, she says the majority of systems are rather stupid. They're at the moment, there's not creating, you know, again, going back to our narratives, this thought of an external civilization, which is more clever than people. We have to, as a union movement, assume failure. In all of these systems, we have to, our starting point should assume that they will harm certain people. And it is our task, if there's no transparency and accountability requirements, to unpack how and who. AI, if we were to use that term correctly, it is not a, you know, it's not a thing. There's not an AI. You can't just point to it like a box sitting there on the shelf. It is a scientific discipline. It's an ecosystem. It's an infrastructure that consists of loads and loads of algorithms, of concepts, of methods. So AI is very complex. So when we talk about, you know, artificial intelligence in the workplace, most of the times we're talking about algorithmic systems more than artificial intelligence. What we do have, though, is machine learning. And machine learning is a subset of this artificial intelligence ecosystem. Machine learning is particularly dangerous. Machine learning is where, and I think Susanna alluded to this before, is where a system is told, if you remember our exercise, what the goal is of, in our case, make a soup, hire a fast, dedicated person, but it's not given the instructions. What happens in a machine learning system is you tell it what you want it to do, and when it starts getting on the right track, you reconfirm that. So the system will go in and say, ah, yes, the soup is nice if you use these onions, red onions over yellow onions. That's better. But then it starts to self-learn. And then it starts to find maybe substituting onions with garlic or something else, but the result is still a wonderful soup. The thing is that we don't know how it learns. This is what they refer to as the black box. And in, for example, everyday appliances that, you know, you might use Spotify, Netflix again, your Facebook news feed, all of that is built on machine learning. So it's not that it is not common, it exists, and requirements are needed to prohibit that black box self-learning. We have to somehow make sure that machine learning systems are accountable to humans. Now, if not, let's jump into the science fiction, the consequences of consequences here. If we do not have, from a political point of view or regulatory point of view, or from in collective agreements, a requirement of that it is always the deploying manager, the deploying public services, who are responsible for the outcomes of this system. Now, we don't have to demand of them that they then unpack the black box. We have to demand you as an employer, you are responsible for any of the impacts, good or bad, that comes out of this system, then that will force them to not accept a black box which they can't account for. So this liability, this really making sure that you are liable and you are responsible, and you cannot push that responsibility over to a thing. We hear all too often, I don't know why it rejected you as a job candidate. It just did. It was the system. We must never, ever, ever accept that excuse, because what they're then doing is shedding their responsibility to this infrastructure, this thing. This is pertinent. The liability, the line of liability, like in any technology that's used or any good or any machine, lies with the company who's deploying it, the public service who's deploying it. It is them who's liable. Now, if you might remember, our myth, in one of our myths from last time, was we seem to assume that management understands the systems they're putting in place. And as I said earlier today, this is simply not the case. So therefore, I think a big union push should be clarifying those lines of responsibility, because that will force them to have to understand the complexity of these systems, and that, you know, that they've fallen for the talk of technology to implement these systems, and even that our governments have signed away the means through which they can govern them, is just absolutely horrific. So can we govern these systems? Yes, we can. We have now understood the algorithms, which are the basis of all of this. We have understood the data, the importance of having strong data protection and data rights. We've also identified many of the gaps, that our laws are based on the individual and not, as Kate was talking about, the collective. So there's also something we should be working on. Machine learning, it's harder, but it's not impossible. And that line of responsibility has to be clearly defined. So in the next workshop, and this is the wrap up of today, we're going to begin to draw inspiration from how we concretely could learn to govern these systems. What issues should unions be pushing for? What questions should we be demanding from the employers? But also, of course, how you then can use that to inspire your advocacy on national law changes, but also on really, remember this concept, breaking the monopolization of truth, which we are so subject to.